Hi, this is Joyce. I prefer they, them, and I'm here to present our work, which examines weaknesses and how people may audit decision makers when they rely on decision explanations. Some context first. There's been increasing discussion of a right to an explanation for those subject to automated decisions, but there's gaps between explanation methods that are often designed for appropriate trust or collaboration with expert users and what end users or auditors actually aim to get at. In a commentary piece, Hadfield argues that the simple goal of a right to an explanation is to check that decisions made by an automated system are justifiable according to community standards. Basically, did they use a reasonable process and reasonable factors? In that work, she gave the example of loan denial. For instance, a quote, valid justification for denying a loan might be, we decided it wasn't profitable to lend to you. A quote, invalid justification might be, we decided not to lend to people of your race or gender. As a side note, figuring out what we consider valid versus invalid is something I'll set aside as a separate question. For the sake of this talk, I'll assume we came in agreeing that using race or age is definitely invalid. In our work, we wanted to test how breakable this right could be, especially if or when a malicious decision maker wants to defend themselves. Suppose we start in a world where there are black box decision makers affecting the lives of decision recipients without any hard requirements for explanations or appeals. We may know some of the past data a system has access to or might be based on, but we don't know exactly what features the decisions actually use or prioritize. For instance, the decision could be based entirely on race, which is something people would object to. To determine how acceptable that decision process is, auditors could ask for explanations of how these decisions were made. Maybe these would reveal something unacceptable, like prioritizing race. What's stopping a decision maker from building a new black box justification system that hides their racist decisions as best as they can? Is this doable while still meeting those outside quality requirements? And how obvious might a malicious justification be? For our experiments, we set up several decision makers, attached malicious justification systems, and measured how well they worked. I'll use the term justification instead of explanation throughout to emphasize that this is information compiled by and sent by the decision maker to the recipients. We used ProPublica's dataset of compass recidivism predictions. This included a risk prediction score for each case, binned into high risk and low risk, and several features including demographics and criminal history. And we split that into 80% representing the imaginary publicly accessible records that everyone could access in this scenario, and 20% representing new decision cases that needed to have a justification provided. From the outside, we have a few requirements. The justifications must be simple. They can't contain too many features. They have to be understandable to people. They must be relevant. It needs to actually match with the decision case that they're given for. And they need to be verifiable. They need to agree with the public data. They can't conflict. The example justification below, for example, would only be usable for cases that were given a high-risk prediction, and only where those two features, the one past conviction and the current conviction as F degree, match up. From the inside, the black box system could just keep scraping through every single combination of features in public data, take advantage of the multiple comparisons problem, and come up with a long list of potentially usable justifications. So in our first experiment, we started with a simple scenario. What if the decision maker only needs to give justifications to individual decision recipients and doesn't need to worry about them sharing information with each other? Maybe there are not many recipients or it's hard to contact each other somehow. Here's some simple example cases. In this scenario, each recipient can't see what response the other case got, or even what the other case is, and it looks fine to each of them. Let's say A got assigned the top justification out of those two options. Then they only see this information. And B only sees this information. So how many of the decisions could be justified? Most of them, regardless of what the actual decision model is. In this table, we show a breakdown of the number of cases that could be justified. Original model is the actual compass, low versus high risk predictions. Racist model sorts solely by race, and the random model is random. As you see in that rightmost column, that's all above 50%. And a lot of that is due to that both column, decision cases where it's possible to get justifications in favor of either low or high risk predictions. We could have a lot more usable justifications if we loosen the requirements or expanded on what templates for justifications we can use, especially if that template is more flexible. That was a simple scenario, though. What if decision recipients are able and willing to share information with each other? Let's use the same example as earlier. Now, this is the information that everyone can see. And B can see that A's justification contradicts with their case. So, how would we measure how well a huge set of publicly visible justifications work with these decision cases? We borrow these metrics from Dasgupta. First is consistency. How much does the same justification describe the same decision outputs? Second is sufficiency. How much does the same justification describe the cases it could apply to? This would capture the contradiction from that example earlier. And third is uniqueness. It is unfair to give everyone an entirely distinct justification. You can't just give people hashes of their individual cases. Now, if these are the metrics that an auditor is using, the malicious decision maker might also already know these metrics and wants to maximize them to protect themselves. So they can pick a justification that has the lowest amount of conflict predicted. So we simulated the decision maker being forced to give a justification for every case, even if they had no usable justifications, so the ante-only cases from earlier. These metrics make more clear that there's issues with sufficiency. Self-contradiction is a little bit harder to get away with if you're trying to justify every case. However, in a real scenario, we only see one of these rows at a time. There's only one actual model that is deployed. What is the threshold for these metrics we consider acceptable? Also, keep in mind that there's a trade-off between low uniqueness and high consistency or sufficiency. If metrics appear bad, would this be caused more by malicious justification design versus some trade-off from the justification style? And finally, one way we could identify malicious justifications might be contrasting the given explanation templates with something else that includes race and see if the metrics improve. But then why would we use an explanation from the decision maker at all? More detail on this is available in the paper if you want to look in more depth. So, final thoughts. One, relying on black box explanations alone for insights on black box models is not a great idea for auditing. Bad actors, or even naive or good actors, could defend most predictions made somehow. If we ask for an explanation for the explanation, if we ask about how the explanation was generated, what's stopping that from being malicious? Bad actors will still be bad actors. And third big point, public justifications plus these faithfulness metrics can show that the explanations are insufficient, perhaps. But it's unclear if there's a good baseline to compare against, if there's a good threshold to use here. And then finally, we could contrast different justification systems that are built from the outside. For instance, compare if a justification that includes race would be doing more effectively than a justification that doesn't include race ever. But then in that case, what is asking the original decision maker for justification actually doing? Why not just entirely evaluate from the outside? But yeah, thank you for listening to this talk, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.